Hey, what's up? We're here to do a video for the Texas history class. I hope everybody's doing good. Last time we were in class, we were talking about the Civil War. Now we're going to jump to the 20th century and talk about World War One. So as you can see, you probably already looked at the Google Classroom. There's several assignments there. This is going to go along with the notes. And so kind of like we're in class, you'll have notes to fill out, but instead of listening to me in person, you get to listen to me in video. So if you need to stop it or pause it, you can do that anytime you want. So let's get started. Let me bring up the notes. All right, so here we go. World War One, the Great War, 1914 to 1918. The Great War was called that because they thought literally this would be the war that settled all the problems in Europe. They thought this would fix everything and they wouldn't have to have another big war like this. Europe had constant warfare, basically never ending warfare between somebody fighting somebody. And so, not that America had been involved with any of those wars, but there was constant fighting among the European countries, and they thought this would end them all. So it's called the Great War, or the War to End All Wars, is what they said back during it when it was happening. So a lot of people get confused and they think that America was in the war the whole time. We weren't going until 1917. So what got us into the war? Well, three things. First off, the United States was economically very, very, very friendly with Great Britain and France. And they were the two main countries fighting the central powers of Germany and Austria-Hungary. And when our best friends, who we trade a lot with, get into war, they wanted us to help them. And America was kind of the China of the early 20th century. We made a lot of stuff. We made more than anybody. We traded more than anybody. And so they wanted us in. They wanted us to be on their side instead of just being neutral, which we were. The second thing, propaganda about German action. So things that Germany did before we got into the war kind of helped bring us into the war. We're going to start with the German proclamation. When the war broke out, Germany said we're launching our submarines in the North Atlantic. We're going to sink all ships. Then they came back and they said, this is the Sussex Pledge. We're not going to sink any American ships or any ships that were, not transporting stuff for the war. So, if it was just Americans carrying grain, then they shouldn't be shot down or sunk. And then after they made that pledge, they sunk a ship known as the Lusitania. Lusitania was a kind of like a cruise ship, a travel ship. And on board were many people, but of those people, 132 Americans. And when the ship was blown up, those 132 Americans all perished. And that's a major thing that the American newspapers were like, oh my God, can you believe what the Germans did? We can't listen to them. We can't believe anything they're going to say because they're going to sink all our ships. And then Germany did declare unrestricted submarine warfare. Basically, the German subs went crazy. They were sinking any ship they could find. And so while that's happening, we discover something else, the Zimmerman telegram. Basically, we intercepted the telegram that was sent from Hans Zimmerman, the German foreign minister, to the foreign minister of Mexico, asking Mexico to attack us. So we would be wrapped up in a war with them, and we couldn't join in a war with Britain and France against Germany. And so once the American public found out about this, and our best friends are in the war, and they blew up the Lusitania, killing Americans, it was time for America to join the war. And so our president, Woodrow Wilson, went to Congress, and they declared war. And so we have to get ready. America made a big impact on the war, but we weren't ready to make that big impact initially. We had to get the troops ready. We had to get soldiers ready. And so to do this, Congress passed the Selective Service Act of 1917. It registered 24 million people to be drafted into the war. Of those 24 million, only 3 million were enlisted in the army. Um, America didn't have a huge army back then. We didn't keep millions of people like we do involved in the army now. We didn't have reserves. We didn't have, all these people training all the time. We had, a few 100,000 guys who were involved, who were full-time Army and Navy people, and that was it. Uh, the Selective Service Act allowed us to draft 3 million people, and we trained them, and now we have to get them to Europe. And so the next major thing we did in the war effort was building a Navy. To build a fleet to fight and ship goods, the United States had to take 4 steps. First thing, we exempted shipyard workers from the draft. So if you worked in a shipyard, you couldn't get drafted. Second thing, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, they created a public relations campaign. Basically today, if they did it today, it would be like sending out all types of things on Twitter and building a website and commercials, and it'd be everywhere about, hey, get involved with the shipyards, get a job in the shipyards, help us build our Navy. The third thing, number 3, we changed how we built ships. Used to, a shipyard would build one ship top to bottom, and that's it. Well, we need to build a lot more. We couldn't build the old slow way. So we started building our ships like we did our cars on the assembly line. And so they would do different things, and they would build certain parts of other ships in other places and ship them there and put them together. And so there's different fabrication techniques help us build ships a lot faster. And the fourth thing, government took control of commercial and private ships. So if you had a big ship for shipping goods, and the American government might take it over. If you had a big yacht, the Americans might take it over to ship people and goods over. So if you had a big enough ship, they might commandeer it and use it for the war effort. And now that we built all these ships, we have to get everything and all the ships and all the people over to Europe. And so we use something called the convoy system. And this is a very important plan that we use to get all the ships across the Atlantic Ocean, because remember, the Germans have submarines all over the Atlantic. And so what we do is we would basically kind of like ducks, a group of ducks in the water. The big powerful boats will be on the outside, and the ships carrying the people and the goods and products needed would be in the middle. And so our destroyers with the big guns and all that would be outside on the edge, so they could fight off other attacks and protect the people on the inside. Well, this is a very successful system. Because of the convoy system, we only lost 637 men in the whole war. That's pretty important considering how big and strong the German Navy was. Fighting in Europe. So when the Americans got there, it was a big, large group of fresh soldiers, guys who hadn't been there the whole time, guys who were ready to fight and were motivated. And they were led by General John J. Pershing. He was the American general at the time. And General Pershing had a long military career. He started out at West Point, where all of the great American generals, except for George Washington, went to. He fought in the Spanish-American War. He pursued Pancho Villa in Mexico. And then finally, he was selected to be the leader of the American Expeditionary Force in World War I. What a resume, right? Fighting in Europe. So when we get there, and before we even got there, we probably knew, but there was a completely different style of warfare than what most people were used to that was being fought. Machine guns were all over the place for the first time. Airplanes, not only were they using to drop bombs, they were spying, and they were fighting each other in the air, called dogfights. And then tanks were introduced, and poison gas was introduced. And a lot of these weapons were used to fight on the battlefield, which is a completely different space. We weren't walking in grassy fields. All fighting took place in trenches. So these big, giant ditches that were dug for men to walk in where they couldn't be shot or anything like that, and they could travel. And these covered the whole front, everywhere there was fighting, and out away from it, so men could get into the front where the fighting was going to take place and travel around all in these trenches, and they wouldn't get hit. If you want to see a great movie, I don't know if you can get a hold of it, but 1917. It's a movie that just came out last year, and it's about World War One, and it shows the trenches and how nasty and messed up they were. But they invented poison gas because they couldn't shoot into the trenches. They started dropping things from airplanes because they couldn't get in. The tanks were made so they could drive right through all the trenches and over them, and all these new inventions of war that were terrible. And so these new technologies were horrific. The battlefield was horrific, and so the soldiers weren't just shot; they were mentally injured. The term shell shocked becomes something that's developed by psychiatric doctors to talk about the soldiers who were coming back from the war. They were who couldn't handle, and who were what we call PTSD today was called shell shock then. So fighting in the war was crazy, was different than anybody had ever seen in battle before. America on the offensive. So some important battles that America took place in. Remember, we weren't there the whole time. We came in 1917, and we fought to the end. Three major battles that helped the Allies advance and I guess take the lead in the war. All Americans were involved with. There are Saint Mihiel in 1918, the Battle of the Argonne Forest in 1918, and then Chateau Thierry in 1918. These are the three major battles that Americans fought in. And one of our most decorated soldiers is this guy right here, Alvin York. Alvin York single-handedly killed 25 Germans and captured 132 of them because he got trapped behind the enemy lines and was able to get in behind them. And when they were retreating, he caught these. In the battle, he killed 25 and captured these 32 before they could get away. And so, because of that, he was awarded the Medal of Honor, the nation's highest honor for a soldier. So the end of the war. The collapse of Germany and came suddenly because it happened. Germany had been in the war for a while, and they had lost their number one ally, Austria-Hungary. Their soldiers began to just stop wanting to fight. They had been there. They're losing, and they had been stuck on those front lines for 4 years, and they were ready to leave. And so a lot of them just left and went home. But the major thing that caused Germany's war effort to collapse was the overthrow of the German monarchy. Germany was ruled by somebody known as the Kaiser Wilhelm, and he was overthrown. Germany had a revolution, and their government was changed into a republic, and they couldn't get support for the war anymore. So at 11 a.m. on the 11th month of the 11th day in 1918, Germany and the Allies signed an armistice, which ends the fighting. It's not a peace treaty yet, but all the fighting ends. Total of the war. So the cost of the war: 22 million soldiers and civilians die because of the fighting. Of that 22 million, the United States lost 40,000 men. Another thing I want to kind of add in here, it's not in the notes, but it's kind of crazy that I'm doing this video because of a virus spreading around the world. But they had a virus that spread around the world in 1918 too. The Spanish flu killed 25 million people around the world. Way, way, way worse disease than the COVID-19. But it spread rapidly through all the soldiers who were stationed over there at the end of the war. It spread back here in the United States. It spread in China. It was all around the world, a worldwide disease, and killed 25 million people. So, kind of ironic we're talking about this and from home in these situations because something happened during this time period. But, that's the way history is. There's all kinds of interesting history things that you can always learn about. So anyway, hope that works. If If I went too fast, you can always, pause it and go back, write down the notes. This goes along the slideshow that I just showed you, goes along perfectly with the notes. So it's just like being in class. All you got to do is listen and write, pause if you need to, rewind if you need to. And this is how we'll be doing things for a couple weeks. So I'll probably post a couple of more videos. I'll be online at the times posted on the Google Classroom if you have any questions or anything like that. So hopefully this works good for everybody, and hopefully I get to see y'all soon. Have a good day. Stay safe. Stay healthy.